I guess the next thing I wanted to talk about, which if you're an R7 owner, you are going to be very familiar with what I'm going to speak on, and that is that I think this bike might be the most hated bike in the bike community. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a little bit since I posted a video, so this one is long overdue. We're gonna jump right into it. Today's video is gonna be about my 2022 Yamaha R7. We're gonna do kind of like a little ride and review. We're gonna talk a little bit about the bike. I'm not gonna cover everything in detail, but mostly what I wanna talk about is kind of my ownership of the bike. One important thing that I wanna talk about is how this bike is perceived in the biking community, which is really kind of an interesting point that I didn't really expect when I got this bike. So we're going to cover that as well and do a little ride and review. I'll probably put some sound clips in here as well so you guys can take a listen. But yeah, just kind of a rough overview of the bike. Like I said, 2022 Yamaha R7. Really the only things that are done to it, some of it you can already see. I did do a quad lock on it. I've got a video on that as well about how to set that up. Tech spec tank grips, really have enjoyed those just for daily riding. Probably not the best maybe if you're like a track rider. I think in some instances that would kind of keep you from being able to move around as easily and slide a little bit on the tank. But for street use, love them. And when I bought the bike, it already had the Akrapovic race system on it, which is actually, this one is built for an MT-07. So you do have to modify the system a little bit to get it to fit on the R7 because of where the rear sets land. In this case, you kind of have to space them out a little bit so that you don't have any clearance issues with the rear brake master cylinder touching the brackets. But I will say overall, I love the way that this exhaust looks. It's probably, outside of maybe the SC Project, it's probably my favorite looking exhaust. And it's a really happy medium. It's plenty loud, but it's not the loudest thing out there to where your eardrums are going to burst and your hearing's going to be gone after a decent ride. Outside of that, I did the TST flush mount turn signals with the halos on them. I just went with clear because I figured that'd look cleaner on the bike. I'm not a huge like smoked or dark fan. And then I just went with the amber ring on it. I know I'm kind of like a grandpa for wanting that, but I just think it looks clean on the bike. And then of course it does have a Yoshimura tail tidy. Might change that at some point to the JL designs that's tucked up underneath, or maybe the new Rage cycles. Looks plenty good for now and much better than the factory crud that hangs off of the back. Only other thing I've done to the bike is it did not have a factory quick shifter when I got it, so I ordered the Yamaha quick shifter. That's a pretty simple install. Unfortunately, I did not record that, but there's tons of videos on how to do that. So yeah, so outside of those modifications, that's really about all that's been done to the bike. It's a ton of fun. I really enjoy it. There are some strange things that come with owning an R7. Those of you who already own an R7 are probably familiar with some of the topics that I'm going to touch on. But yeah, we're just going to do a little ride and review, hopefully get some sound clips, talk about the bike a little bit, and kind of how this bike is perceived in the bike community and what my thoughts are on that. So anyways, let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'll post some sound clips here, and then we'll jump into kind of a ride and review. She's loud. Alrighty, well here we are on the R7. We'll go ahead and get going. Hopefully there won't be too much traffic. Kind of hard to talk and ride at the same time, but we're gonna do our best. So All right, well, hopefully the audio is okay for you guys. This is kind of my first time really recording a video with the mic set up and the helmet and whatnot, so hopefully that turns out okay. If not, I will adjust in the future, but I did a quick little test and it seems like it picks it up okay. So yeah, so I just wanted to get on the bike and kind of do a little ride and review, talk about the bike, what my thoughts are on it after owning it for almost 10 months now, and kind of just my thoughts on the bike in general and how this bike is perceived in the bike community, which is one really important thing that I want to talk about. So overall, I really love this bike. Just for clarity, this is my first bike. I am now 30 years old. Owning a bike is something I've always wanted to do. I've always been a car guy, so it was kind of an easy transition for me. I grew up riding dirt bikes and stuff like that, so kind of had already some idea of how to ride motorcycles, right? But still pretty new to it. So as much of an adrenaline junkie as I am, I guess you could say in my older age, I wanted to be as smart as I could, but also still have fun and get a bike that I wasn't going to be tired of in 6 months. And this is a dead end. So anyways, so that kind of narrowed down the options for me for the most part. R7 was obviously on the list. I also at one point was even considering, because it had just come out, the CF Moto 450 SS. I will say I'm very glad I did not go with that bike. Simply because it did not take very long for me to get used to the power of this bike. Overall, this is a really great bike. I don't know if I really want to say this is a good beginner bike. I really hate that topic, and there's a bazillion videos on like what beginner bike should I get, and it's a constant question. I guess if I were to give an answer, get whatever you think you want to get within reason. So whatever that is. So for example, for me, like a lot of people say like, oh, R3 or a Ninja 400, and it's not that that's not a great bike, but I can guarantee you, for me, even as my first bike, I would have been bored of that bike in no time at all. It did not take me very long to get used to this bike, and I just know that anything less, I would have been a little bummed. And it's a lot of money to spend to not get something that you're gonna ride for, you know, at least a while, right? So overall, I'm pretty happy with my purchase. You know, there's definitely other bikes that you could get that are in this price range. You know, there's definitely other bikes that you could get for what you pay for this that are way faster, maybe more tech. That would probably be hard to pull off, but definitely something faster, right? Like you could get an older Gen R6 for cheaper than what I paid for this. One thing that kind of hung me up was like the looks, I guess, which sounds like really stupid, but I just loved the way the newer Yamahas look, and like really any of the newer bikes. And so it made it hard for me to want to go to an older gen. And granted, this thing is not like loaded with electronics, but the dash is, you know, pretty nice for what it is, and it's not like a old school tachometer, no gas gauge, no nothing, right? Like a lot of the older bikes and previous Gen R6s. So I think it's a decent purchase. You know, it's a ton of fun. It's got really usable power. I think that's the best thing about this bike, is it's not fast in the world of bikes, right? But it's not slow either, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit more. So this bike has just really good usable power, especially if like you're doing this kind of riding, right? Like around town, in the city. It's got good power. As you can see, I don't know if you can hear me, but it's got good power. It's not slow. It's quick, and you get to go through a lot of the gears, and you know, the quick shifter definitely makes the bike a lot more fun. Kind of lost my train of thought, having to pay attention too much. But yeah, overall, I really like the bike. I think it's a great bike. I think it's a bike that almost anybody can start out on. One thing that I did really love about the R7 was that you get the super sport, you know, look, you get the crotch rocket look, and the seating position, so it looks really cool. I don't know if I'd say it feels really cool. It's uncomfortable as shit after any amount of time, but you know, if that's what you're aiming for, you definitely get it with this bike, minus the typical, you know, super sport or crotch rocket power plant, right? This has a twin cylinder, whereas, you know, R6 inline 4-cylinder, a lot more high-end power, peaky. You know, you really kind of have to be giving it the beans. Whereas this bike makes a ton of torque down low, right? Like I'm in 5th gear at 50 miles an hour at 4,000 RPM, and you know, it's not crazy fast at that spot, but it moves. It can get out of its own way. And it sounds freaking awesome. Like these CP2s, they have such a cool sound to them with that 270-degree crank. Like for example, my buddy, his first bike was a Ninja 650, which I actually thought was a great bike, but definitely didn't have like the unique sound that this bike does with these 270-degree cranks that Yamaha puts in these. So has a really cool sound. It's got good power. It looks really awesome. You don't get a lot of tech, but to be honest, you don't really need it. You don't need traction control on a bike that only makes like 70 wheel horsepower if the ECU's flashed. You know, but it's definitely, this bike could be too much for somebody who's like never so much as ridden a bicycle, right? Like it might be a little much for them, but that's kind of why I say, like, you know, get the bike for you that you want within reason, right? I could have certainly started on a much more powerful bike. I don't know if that would be the smartest idea, but I have ridden like a Ducati 1198, a ZX-10R, XSR 900, and things like that. And I'm more than capable of riding them, like especially just like this type of riding, right? I am nowhere near being able to maximize the potential of a bike like that, but I can ride them. So I could have started on a bike that had more power, but you know, I'm getting close to a year of being on this bike, and I'm not disappointed in it, I'll put it that way. There are times where I wish it had a little more top end, a little more grunt, but for the most part, like I go out riding with my buddy with the ZX-10R and XSR 900 and things like that, and I'm not like, it's not like I'm riding a moped, you know. So that's kind of my personal thoughts on it. Really, you know, in summary, I think it's a great bike. I think it's a really good purchase if it's kind of falls into what you're looking for. I do think this bike is probably a little overpriced, honestly, for what it is. I think this bike would make a lot more sense if it was like $2,000 less than what I paid for it. But I kind of got sold on the looks of it, and it was my first bike, so I was like, well, I don't want to go crazy and get like a leader bike, something with 200 horsepower, and you know, I know myself too well, I can't help it. And so I just, this bike can still get you into trouble, but not at the same rate at what some other bikes can do. So anyways, that's kind of my thoughts on the bike. I guess the next thing I wanted to talk about, which if you're an R7 owner, you're going to be very familiar with what I'm going to speak on, and that is that I think this bike might be the most hated bike in the bike community. I was not expecting that whatsoever. I really had no idea. Like, I guess it was because I knew that, like, even though people were kind of butthurt that this was like framed as the replacement for the R6, I knew it wasn't an R6 when I was getting it. I wasn't expecting to have that like top end power, top speed, all that. So I think if you know what you're buying, I don't know, I don't see any reason to be like that upset about it. But all over the internet, like all the time, Instagram reels, YouTube comments, everything, like people just shit on this bike like to a level that I've never seen with anything else. Like, for example, I've never seen somebody talk as much shit about the R7 as they would about like any other bike that's kind of in this class, right? Like, I rarely see a guy with a Ninja 650 making an Instagram reel that has a lot of views and people are commenting like, what a piece of shit, that Ninja 650 is a turd, it's slow, it's blah 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 blah.
Like I really never see that. Whereas with this bike, when I see a post, people are like, not a real super sport, complete turd, waste of time. Like, I mean, there is a lot of like animosity towards this bike, which is just like really strange to me, I guess. I just wasn't expecting that. And like I said, I think it all stems back to this bike was the replacement for the R6, right? And so I can see why people were like upset about that, but it doesn't mean it's not a good bike, right? Like, just because a ZX6R is way faster than a Ninja 650 and it's a 4-cylinder high revving engine doesn't make the Ninja 650 a piece of shit. You know, like, you really never hear that comparison. So I don't know, it's just really strange. With that said, I will say that the bike's probably a little overhyped. It's definitely overpriced. And I think what would be perfect is what's possibly coming out next year is an R9. Because I got to ride an XSR 900 a good bit. And to me, out of everything I've ridden so far, that is like the perfect amount of power. It's got good torque, it revs high, it's got plenty of top end, it has a really cool sound. So it kind of hits all the spots that this bike misses on without just being like ludicrously insane. Like my buddy's ZX10R, I've ridden that bike a handful of times, and every time I ride it, I am just like, this is insane that you can just go out and buy this for like $6,000 or whatever, right? And it gets hot as and when you're riding in like the city where I live, you're stuck in like first and second gear just like all the time, you know, which maybe some people think that's a good thing, but I don't know. Every time I ride it, I'm like, this thing is insane. So anyways, yeah, I think that like 100 to 120 horsepower range is like perfect for a bike. If the XSR 900 wasn't a naked bike, I would probably have already gotten rid of this bike because the tech is so much better on those bikes. Has up and down quick shifter, TFT dash, traction control, all that good stuff. And if it was in this bike, this platform, it would be like the perfect bike to me. So anyways, that's kind of my thoughts on the bike. A little you know, a little ride and review after owning this bike for, you know, almost 10 months now and riding it a good bit. I've put a couple thousand miles on this bike. Just wanted to kind of share my thoughts, show you guys the bike, and just see what you guys think. One thing that we'll cover in the future, because people like to talk about how slow this bike is we're going to do some draggy testing. I've already done a couple just test runs just to see, and we're going to see how slow this thing really is. And so that'll be upcoming at some point when I get the time. Alright guys, well that is going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please subscribe, leave a like, a comment if you feel like it, and we will see you guys in the next one.